Hello, and we are live on Passions Live again. We were very conscious recently of the number of amounts of Passions content that we've been producing and putting out to people. And we've been discussing it and decided we needed to just have a little bit of a breather, especially next week, because I'm actually away on holiday. And I'm actually in Whitby. Excuse me, I'm actually in Whitby. And I can't wait to go to Whitby. Never thought I'd kind of say that, but obviously in the way that things have been in the last 15, 16 months, just a bit of fresh air, the sea, absolutely amazing. So, so we've been trying to think about maybe getting a little bit more controlled on our output. But I saw this message that came through about my guest today, Alison and Brian, from our good friend of Passions, Ray Jones. And I just thought it was so interesting and so intriguing. And we love a good story, don't we, on Passions? So I'm delighted today to be joined by Alison Hitchcock and Brian Greenley. And I've not spoken to them before. That's the other thing that we'd often do on Passions. We just go into it, create that extra level of jeopardy, as if live stream isn't enough of a jeopardy. And we'll find out all about them, about their story. So a very warm welcome to Passions, both of you. This is the first time on Passions we've done a double interview as well. Mm-hmm. So you're firsts in that arena as well after 50, 60 interviews that we've done, which is great. So I'll start with you, Alison. Would you like to just introduce yourself and just give us an overview then of who you are and what your passion is?
So I'm Alison Hitchcock, and Brian Greenley is my friend. And he is my friend because when he was diagnosed with cancer in 2010, and I was just an acquaintance of his, I made a rather bizarre offer to write letters to him to cheer him up through his cancer treatment. And now, 11 years later, we both run a charity called From Me to You, which is all about connecting people who are living with a cancer diagnosis through letters. And that can be friends, family, or even strangers who write anonymous letters.
So if I had to pin you down and say, what's your passion? What would you say your passion is? Is it helping people, supporting people? I don't want to put words in your mouth, but
no,
is it that or more?
It's about connecting people, but through letters.
Wonderful.
So we're all about the letters.
And I'm old enough to remember letters as well, so we're definitely on a winner. Brian, very warm welcome to the show. Why don't you introduce your good self and what you feel your passion or passions are?
So I'm Brian Greenley, and I'm the co-founder of From Me to You, which is a charity that I co-founded with Alison. I met Alison back in 2009 on a yoga retreat in Goa in India, as you do. And we kept in touch when we were back for about 6 months. And then I was diagnosed with cancer. And then she made the bizarre offer of writing letters to me. No history of letter writing in her background before, but she wrote over 100 letters to me. My passion is I don't want anyone to feel isolated when they're going through cancer treatment. That I would prefer people to write a letter than ignore people, because I don't think it's a good idea to ignore someone who has or any illness going through any treatment, to ignore them because you don't know what to say, when you can easily send them a postcard or write them a letter or send them a text, because ghosting people when they're ill is just not one good idea.
Wow, when I saw this and saw what you're doing, I just thought it was absolutely amazing. And ironically, of course, more, if not as relevant, but more relevant, of course, in the last 18 months, where isolation's been a massive, massive thing on a level that none of us could have ever understood. Where are you at now, Brian, then, with your recovery?
So I'm now 11 years into my cancer journey, but I've been very, very fortunate in that having had a stage 4 diagnosis and thinking that my time was up pretty damn soon, I've been clear for 9 years.
Oh, right. Okay.
There's been no evidence of disease for the last 9 years. And as a result, I don't get very many letters from Alison anymore.
Right, there are other people that need letters now.
Calling her
And
out
she said-
on
she said she's
live
only
online, calling her out.
She only said that she'd write to me while I was ill, and she kept to her word on that one.
Yeah, you got better, Brian.
That is amazing. And then, is it fair to say that it's looking good, but you never quite know whether there might be something comes back, or how does that work, Brian?
Well, I'm very fortunate in that I still get regular checks through the brilliant NHS, who looked after me so magnificently. I have had a colonoscopy only 10 days ago,
Wow.
and that was all okay. So, so far so good. And I get a scan every year, and I had a scan in October, and that was fine. So that just gives me the comfort that we, as best we can, that we know that there's nothing going on. And so then I can carry on with my life.
Brilliant. Have you actually seen any impact on treatment? There's been a fair bit of media coverage about, about how all the focus on COVID has meant that other illnesses have maybe been neglected slightly more. Cancer has been mentioned a few times. Is that something you've observed or been aware of at all?
I have, yes, because I've got some friends who are going through a long cancer journey, and they've had delays in their journey, and you have to, and only recently they got some news that it wasn't so good again. And you can't help but think that maybe there were some delays which in their treatment plan, which could have, stopped that happening. But we now got to a stage, I saw something the other day, where more people are dying cancer per day than COVID.
Yeah, I mean, absolutely. And this is one of the big debates that we've been having, isn't it? As a world, never mind as a country. It's really tricky. And, I tend to be quite candid and honest and open in these sessions. And I can honestly say that I've been very lucky, and I'm touching every bit of wood I can, that as a family, we've not really been touched by cancer. And I know, pray every morning and such like. So I can acknowledge, if you like, that I would struggle to really empathize what it means and what it's like to be going through that.
But you have one thing: you've been through isolation with lockdowns.
Yeah.
So you know how it feels to be in a lockdown situation where your normal support network disappears, where your family and friends, you can't get to see them, where you've been isolated. Whether you're on your own or whether with your family, it's immaterial in my mind. You can still feel isolated if you've got all the family around you, because you would get up and go to work and go out to the office and get your feed of from your colleagues and clients of things that sustain you. So if you can just empathize from that perspective, then you've got a good idea that somebody going through a cancer treatment will often feel isolated, especially in the last 18 months when they've had to go into hospital on their own for treatment. So they're relying on the kindness of nurses and strangers to actually be there with them, because no family member can be there for them. And what we try to encourage is that people can write letters to family and friends to keep connected. As Alison mentioned, we have a scheme about donate a letter, where people write, strangers donate letters to us, which we then pass on to people. So that when people go to a hospital or go to their day clinic for their chemotherapy, what they actually receive is a letter from us, from our charity, so that they know that someone somewhere out there is actually thinking of them at that point in time.
Wow, what an amazing idea and what an amazing concept. So when you started this then, Alison, I mean, we're talking about letters. I'm assuming you do actually mean in the physical sense of the word, including a stamp.
Yeah.
Is that right? As opposed to an email that kind of is being...
Yes, because...
How does that work?
So yes, the physicality of the letter is important, because that is what you hold. And Brian and I will often say that in the era of digital communication, we don't hold anything anymore that we communicate with. And the letter, the postcard, the card is about the only thing that is a physical communication. And so that's important. It's not so important that it's handwritten, because now, we have wonderful fonts that we can print off on that make it, that make it feel a little bit more personal rather than just the harshness of an email. But yeah, it has to be put in the envelope. You have to get the person's address, you have to get a stamp, and you have to post it. And I think that when you receive something like that, the effort that the person's gone to, because people don't just have stamps lying around. They don't just have stationery lying around. You have to kind of go and buy it and go walk to the post box to post it. It's not all available on your phone. So that is part of the gift of the letter, is the thought and care, not only that the person's put into writing it and taking time out of their day to write it, but to actually go and post it. And then the surprise that the person receiving it has when it lands on their letterbox, because it's not immediate. You don't know when it will arrive. I mean, I would often text Brian after I posted my letter to say, has it arrived yet? Has it arrived?
Yeah, make sure you keep the post office in check. Make sure you keep the post office accountable.
And so again, it's that element of there's somebody thinking about you, doing something for you, and it's all about them giving you something with no expectation of something back. So yes, so the physicality is important. Great.
It's interesting, this in complete coincidence, but my wife and I last night were watching a program about the Savoy Hotel, and I don't know if you saw it, but it was all about behind the scenes at the Savoy Hotel. And this guy had arranged a proposal for his fiancée, and it involved a really flashy meal. He'd booked the £10,000 a night, yes, £10,000 a night suite at the Savoy, and there was petals here, there, and everywhere. And I turned around and I said to her, "Would you be impressed if I did all that for you?" And she said, "Well, first she said, well, I'd rather have the £10,000 than a."
She's a wise woman.
She just says it. It's a Mancunian thing. I think we tend to say things as they are. But the point I'm making is, she said, it's not about all that. It's not all about the flamboyance. It's about the thought, and it's about the effort, and that you actually tried. So I can. That's just last night, funnily enough. And people do value more now than ever, because time's so precious, isn't it now?
Yeah,
people giving you their time is arguably more valuable, or perceived more valuable, than even money. Yeah. And we get feedback from our donate a letter scheme, which Brian mentioned, where people write anonymous letters and they are distributed in hospitals and they go direct to people's homes. And then the people receiving them give us feedback, and they often say, I can't believe that somebody took the time to write me that letter. Or I can't believe that they took the time to go and find out those 3 facts that they wrote about cactus, or that poem that they shared with me that's their favorite poem, and they took the time to share it with me. And it's that really touches people. And then, of course, and there is then the whole element that the letter takes you to another place. It takes you, and that's what I was trying to do when I was writing to Brian, to take him away from his reality that he was living in at the time, and just give him a moment to just have a peek into somebody else's life, and just be distracted, and perhaps be able to smile and just feel a little bit normal. When we hear that a lot, that people say, when I read the letter, just for that moment, I felt normal. Crikey.
And we had a lady the other day who said, she'd received an anonymous letter, but the person had talked about their garden. They were writing about their garden. And she said, so I decided to go and stand in my garden, because I realized I hadn't done that, because she'd been sort of so much engulfed with her own illness. And she said, and I just stood in my garden just for 5 minutes, and it changed my day.
Oh, it's the simple things, isn't it?
Mm,
And
yeah.
one of the things I've noticed, and I'm interested to get your perspectives on it, in terms of whether it's just my perception or a reality. It just seems to be that since the lockdown, since the pandemic scenario, a lot of people seem to be talking more about the importance of kindness. Is that my perception, or is that a reality to you folks?
No, it's
I think
everywhere.
I think that's more of a reality. I think a reality. When we had our first lockdown, we were debating how we were going to carry on. Because there was a huge debate about was the virus on paper, all that stuff. Until we got clarification from it, and then we observed something else. People began to write more letters because they had more time at home. And they were able to observe nature, like Alison said, in their gardens. They talk about their 1-hour walk that they were allowed to do. And suddenly we were inundated with letters when we thought they would just fade away.
Wow.
And suddenly we were receiving more letters than we had for a while.
And
That's
people were
fascinating.
putting things into the letters. So, I mean, occasionally somebody would always put a tea bag in. But suddenly, almost not every letter, but probably every third letter had got a bookmark in, or a crocheted heart,
Like
or
this.
yeah,
Oh, wow.
or a button,
That's
a button flower. So people
The simple
were
things of
wanting
life.
yeah, they were just wanting to give that little bit more, and I think that was an act. That was an act of kindness. That they just wanted to just give a little bit more than the letter.
Yeah, and I guess one of the debates that's going on a lot now, isn't it, is that what will the new normal look like? And it's an overused phrase, but I think there's, again, interested to get your perspective. But I feel as almost like a subliminal anxiety at the moment about going back to normal, going back to, because I think we get on hamster wheels, don't we, of life. You're laughing there, Brian, so I'm assuming you're agreeing with me. We get on this hamster wheel of life, and it's nobody's got the time to smell the flowers, as it were, and all of a sudden we've got the chance to get off the hamster wheel. And now the idea of getting back on it, and the idea of going down excuse my French, going down the bloody M6 to a meeting in Birmingham at 6 a.m. on a cold November's day, the thought of that is horrific.
But I think what we've done is that we've learned to be a bit smarter. So you won't be driving down the M6. Hopefully, you'll be on a call like this. You'll be, and international business travel. People can't do it, but they found a way to carry on. So you think companies can save millions by not sending their executives around the world on jollies, basically in club aircraft. So I think we will have learned some lessons about how it is. I think there's some anxiety about mixing with more than 6 people, if I'm honest, because I don't know if you saw it, but in Liverpool at the weekend they had a rave, and seeing, it was completely safe. People had negative tests, no one wore a mask, but they were all close together. And that just seemed bizarre to me. And I just don't think that I would feel that comfortable personally being in the midst of that. Whereas 3 years ago, not a problem. But
You
now,
were always at a rave 3 years ago, Brian, weren't you?
Eh?
You were always at a rave 3 years ago.
I know, but I did go to a festival, do you remember? I went to Latitude Festival, and I was in one of those tents with everybody. So I can say that.
So the question is, Brian, are there any photographs?
Probably somewhere.
But we're not seeing them because it could create some
issues.
I
think people have anxiety about going into the office, about going into social situations, and I think it's about mixing with more than 6 people, but also meeting people face to face, because we're all being used to sort of, having a life on Zoom, and suddenly, how would you feel about going into a meeting room and there's 6 people, and suddenly you've got to deal with that? That's quite a big step, I think, from people's social anxieties.
Yeah, and of course, especially sorry, Alison, but especially theatres, and I think it was announced yesterday, wasn't it, that Odeon are going to open again on the 17th of May, I think.
Yeah.
And cinemas, theatres, whilst everybody, I think there's a pent-up demand for that.
Yes.
I don't think there's any doubt about that. it's whether psychologically we can deal with it.
Because when you look at the snooker at the weekend, they had the crowd there, and when the lights were down, you heard the crowd. But when the lights were suddenly raised, everyone had a face mask on, and suddenly it looked a bit bizarre, didn't it?
Yeah, I just suddenly thought. Then imagine somebody in 20 years' time coming across this interview and coming across this video interview on YouTube and thinking, what the hell are they talking about? It's it'd be like possibly talking about World War I sometime in the future, and looking back to, I remember when, So when you kind of wrote these letters then, Alison, initially, you were just being a friend to Brian, I guess. Did you ever imagine it would take off and become a charity, or was that something that was ever on your mind at the time?
No, I mean, I wrote the letters. I had a career in the city. I wrote the letters with absolutely no agenda other than just to make Brian smile, really. All I wanted to do was cheer him up through his treatment. And his treatment went on for 2.5, 3 years. And I discovered this joy of writing. So I then took myself on a creative writing course, and I left working in the city, and I was all about the writing. And Brian went back to work. So we just carried on with our lives. And by that time we were best friends, having been acquaintances. The letters had kind of created us to be best friends. And we just got on with our lives. And it wasn't until quite a few years later that we were being interviewed by the BBC for the Listening Project. And they were saying, you have to do something with this. This is a great story. And then together we came up with the idea of setting up a charity, which was supposed to be a hobby for both of us. But it just took over our lives. It just captured the public's imagination, I think, and it just took over our lives. And 4 years later, we now distribute every year over 7,000 letters into hospitals and into homes to people who are living with cancer, as well as all the things we do to encourage friends and family to stay connected with people who have cancer. And
amazing.
Going to your point about the anxiety of us kind of opening up again and being with more than 6 people. And my concern and my fear, I suppose, is that when people do that, they'll think, well, we think that we're safe, but we're not sure. So let's not include our friend with cancer. Let's not include the person who's ill in our group of 6. And so their isolation continues. And that's a message that I think we've really got to get out there, that yes, you want your friend to be safe, but as Brian says, don't ghost them because you don't quite know how to not invite them out to the rave or to the concert or the festival.
Do you know, I think that's absolutely fascinating. You mentioned this, didn't you, Brian, a few minutes ago, about how people in some cases maybe avoid the situation because they don't know what to say. I mean, I don't know, maybe there's a little book there, a little pamphlet, a book or something that just advises or guides people on, feeling more comfortable in that situation. Because I know exactly where you're coming from, and I think it's probably the same for a lot of illnesses that people might have.
Yeah, I think some of the leading charities like Macmillan do have some stuff on their website about what to say to a person who has cancer, and they have pamphlets on it. And we've used some of those examples to get that message across. But it's not just generally what to say, it's also that you consciously avoid them. So you, instead of calling in to see them or meeting them for a drink or a coffee like you would normally do, you don't get in touch. And so the person who has cancer sits there and thinks, well, I haven't heard from so-and-so. I wonder what's going on. And then might send a text or something, and you might not get a reply, or you'll get something, oh, I'm busy working, the family are busy. They'll make excuses, and that before they had time for you and now they don't. And so social media can be a help or a hindrance. And in this case, it doesn't take much for you to go onto Instagram, because you'll all be following your friends, or on TikTok or something like that, and you'll see they're all out having a nice time. Can you imagine how you must feel that you've been ignored and left out? And that is, in my mind, that's not what a real friend does. And cancer brings not only just the disease, but it brings all sorts of anxieties and mental health problems. So being ghosted is quite a really bad thing to happen. And what happened to me was that friends who I had for a long time, and people that I'd met, just like Alison, they all changed. Their whole strategy changed in my life, because people would step up that you least expected. And people who you thought would expect to stand up, and that includes family, often didn't. So it was a very confusing time, because you just don't know you just have to say yes or no. But it's interesting that, some people just can't cope with somebody who's ill. And you don't know what's gone on in their background, or in their DNA, or, or themselves. So, it's just a difficult time, I think.
I find that absolutely extraordinary, to be honest. It just makes me wonder, because how much of it maybe is a subliminal thing rather than a conscious thing. Maybe something that's happened in the past, or maybe a parent or
Exactly.
that they've come across, maybe even forgotten about. It could have been something in childhood.
Yeah.
But Brian, I was just going to say, Brian's somebody who's got a lot of family and friends. So Brian wasn't short of people who could support him. Whereas if you are quite limited in your social group, and then that, totally, it's not about cruelty, it's just about people's behavior. If that happens, you can finish it really alone. And there was one lady who receives letters from us. She said that she noticed that even people on Twitter weren't interacting with her as much.
That's unbelievable.
And I think that is, but it's what happens, and it's what people don't know, because we often just hear about the kind people.
And I think also that people could be, they hear the news because it's spread through the grapevine, and then because you haven't told them yourself, they often don't know what to say, and that's when they started, the avoidance tactics start, I think, in terms of, well, I know, but I don't know. Should I say something? Should I say something? If I say something, what am I going to say? And, and then they'll just say, how are you? Well, I got cancer. So how am I supposed to answer that?
Yeah, that's almost like an automatic cliche question, isn't it? I guess.
So going back to what you're saying about what to say, is if you add today, or how was your weekend, then you have a start of a conversation that starts. So it's just subtle changes. So if you bumped into someone, you just say, how are you feeling today? And that makes it an easier conversation.
Yeah, I just find it
interesting. It's also about not allowing that person to be defined by their illness.
Yeah.
So when I was writing to Brian, I never used to write about his cancer. I didn't know anything about cancer. But, I didn't want our friendship just to be about, cancer, because Brian was still a human being. He still had a life. He was going to get better. And so it seemed kind of almost disrespectful to only think that person could deal with conversations about cancer. So it's fine to be yourself and to be normal and just to talk normally about your life. It's kind of, you're not hurting the person who's got cancer, you're just treating them as a human being.
And that's what we say to people who write letters for us: don't mention cancer, You can say I hear you're unwell, or, I hear you're in hospital. But we don't want to get into that cancer debate, and we don't encourage people to give advice about what worked for them or what didn't work for them or what treatment to have. We keep it very much with the everyday conversation, because we just want, for that moment in time when that person gets that letter, to be distracted from where they are, but also afterwards for them to have a thought about, somebody wrote to me, and then when they receive a visitor or when they go home from their day treatment, they can say, something unusual happened today. I received a letter from a stranger. And that changes the conversation with whoever they might see immediately afterwards or in the next few days. And that conversation then starts something else. It starts people thinking, well, I could do something kind for someone. And it might not be writing a letter from me to you, but it might them think, yeah, I should ask them out for a coffee, or, oh, so-and-so's friend has got cancer. I wonder if there's anything I can do. And so it just starts a thought process.
It absolutely does. I mean, I think of myself now. I don't know, without this conversation, let me go back a step. Without this conversation today, I've got absolutely no idea how I would have reacted to a situation like you're describing now. But because it's now in my conscious mind, in the very possible smallest way, I'm now much more aware of it. So when if something happens like that, I'll be significantly more understanding, shall we say, and I'll be more aware of how to behave and not to just ignore people. I don't think I would have done, but you don't know, do you, until it actually happens to you.
No. And it's not like a bad cold, it just lasts for a week. Cancer treatments last for years. And it goes through, it comes back, then you start another realm of treatment. And people, around the time they go for scans, are quite anxious, waiting for the results. And so, they may sort of not be as social as they were before, or their mood might change. So you're sort of, you don't know what's going on with people, but you just sort of have to do the best you can to sort of reach out to them, I think.
Yeah, absolutely right. So do you obviously talked about the city there, Alison, that you worked in the city. Did you have any kind of passion for writing or creative writing whilst you were in the depths of the city as this, I don't know, this financial goddess? I don't know what you're doing.
No, I had a passion for drinking and partying.
Oh my God. And you've admitted that online live. It's amazing.
Yeah, that was, if you'd have interviewed me 15 years ago, that would have been the only thing I'd have spoken about. So when I said to Brian, I'm going to write letters to you to cheer you up, I went home and I thought, what have I just done? Because I hardly knew him. We'd met on this yoga holiday, and I'd only met him a couple of times since the holiday, and we got on well on the holiday, but we didn't have a lot in common. And I was busy. I had a life. And there was a man with cancer, and I was like, these letters will make you laugh. And I was like, what's funny about cancer? But then I just thought, he's got cancer. All I've got to do is write a letter. So just write it. And I did actually think that his cancer, I didn't realize how serious his cancer was. And so I thought, this will be a 2-month job and we'll be done.
Little did you know.
But the reason I think that I loved it so much was that I'd never had an opportunity where I would sit down and do something that was just for me, really. Sitting down writing a letter was my quiet time, but I was doing it for somebody else. So it sort of had like a double whammy on me of goodness. And it was just having that me time and that reflective time. And at the time, I would collect stories, and I'd overhear anecdotes in cafes and things, and I'd write them down and I'd put them in the letters for Brian. But actually, when I came to read the letters years later, I found that the letters, they were just about me, because of course it was just my take on everything. So it was just like reading a journal, which of course now we know how good journaling is. I didn't know back then. So basically I was writing my journal and putting it in the post to Brian.
Fantastic. I think that's part of the amazing story, because not it's not correct, but it is true that there's a general perception, isn't there, of the city. You know, I just said there, the financial goddess, and you said there about going out and getting drinking and such like. Did you find, as you found this opportunity and you found creative writing, you found the situation to support Brian, did it fundamentally change you as a person? Did it strip you out of the culture of what you might call corporate city life? Was it that profound?
Yeah. Well, I would never say that it was just the letters that were so profound, because at the time I didn't know the impact that they were having on Brian. I just was having a lovely time writing them. But yes, they led me on to discovering creative writing, and that then just transformed everything for me. I just discovered this creative part of my brain that I didn't know I had, and that was just such a pleasure and a gift. So yeah, so I quit the city and did other things, and that's why now I just love running the charity, because it's all come out of such a good place, and it put me into a really good place. I mean, I got married and everything.
like shock! I got married.
Oh, Phil, you didn't know me.
You had some time to think about that, though.
Yeah, I just think it's amazing. And those sorts of stories, though, that what you're talking about there, are very inspirational for a lot of people, just in terms of the fact where you came from what in effect was a career of arguably of process, of systems, probably not a lot of room for creativity, I guess, in that sense. And that's part of what we love in Passions, is where people have identified new passions that they didn't know that they had, and that they've gone on to make a living from, or a part of a living from. So again, I don't want to put words in your mouth, but would you say now that one of the biggest satisfactions compared with the past of your corporate life is that you now make a difference every day?
I don't really think about it like that. I mean, I hope I do, but I don't really think about it like that. I think it's that I'm doing something which is so very, very different to how I was before, and that's just a joy to think that you can almost reinvent yourself, and you can be something different, and you can discover that different part of you that you never knew existed, but was clearly always there, and now that's got some space to live. That's what I like.
It's interesting. What do you think, Brian? Do you think she's making a difference every day?
I think she does, but she doesn't realize it, because with all those letters going out, it has to make a difference every day to somebody's life. And if it doesn't, well, they read it for 2 minutes, and for 2 minutes they were somewhere else. But the creativity side of it definitely blossomed, because Alison worked in recruitment and was, probably a bit bored with all that politics and stuff. And her creative writing led us to some very wacky ideas that, with me tagging along, reading my part, we were in rooms above pubs in London, reading extracts from her letters and my journal at the time. We were, at some student festival, reading something. We were then, we decided we were going to do the Brighton Fringe, and we were going to rent a venue for one night only. We were going to put on an hour's show with extracts from the letters and my journal entries, and we sold out. And we were like, wow, this is amazing. Now, I'm used to be doing presentations from a corporate perspective, but I've never been stood on a stage since I was 8 years old and read from my own personal stuff. So that was a challenge for me. But that creative side of Alison made us challenge ourselves in that way. But it also led to other things, because then her husband was very sporty, and Alison used to try and keep up with him, and now I think she can probably beat him. But it's a case of personal challenges to raise money for the charity to get sponsorship led her to do a triathlon, what she would never have considered before. And because of her making a difference in doing that triathlon, 3 years later, I was inspired at the age of 62 to do a triathlon and raise money for the charity. So our personal challenges led from her creativity of thinking, yes, we can do this. These are great ideas. And between us, we come up with some wacky ideas that fill our passion for life. And you know, I was never a sportsman, never, ever in my life. But who ended up on the BBC sports page for the triathlon as the lead story? And there I am in my bathing cap.
In the River
On my
Thames.
head, and that picture will always haunt me. It always makes me laugh. But without those letters that Alison created, we would never have started From Me to You. We would have never done wacky things like we've done.
Yeah, it's almost like it's like the movie Sliding Doors, and that always fascinates me, isn't it?
Absolutely.
You know, those moments where if Alison just thought, oh, yeah, I'm just a bit busy, I'll write a letter to Brian eventually. Yeah. You know, and
she'd gone home, she'd gone home that day, and she would have said, "I'm not going to bother writing letters." The three of us wouldn't be sat here.
Oh, I know it can get a bit wild, you know that, don't you? With string theory and parallel universes, there's all sorts. That's another show altogether. That's a sci-fi show. And you've got a corporate background as well, then, Brian, have you? Have you got a business background? Yeah.
Yeah. So
you've left all that behind now.
Yeah, I'm too old for all that caper now, and I've got too many other things, exciting things, cracking on.
Yeah, absolutely.
Thinking what my next challenge is going to be.
I mean, one of the things that I'm a business consultant by trade, as they say, and I do a lot of coaching with people. And one of the most common questions I get all the time is this whole thing about, he wants to get to know you and trust you a little bit more. They'll then ask you the question, and I paraphrase it slightly, but how the hell do I get out of this corporate nightmare? Yeah. And I'm quoting one particular person who said that. And the same things come up, the fact they don't feel they're making a difference. They don't think they've got control over their own destiny. And I think that's something else that's come as a result of the last 18 months, is that people have got off that corporate merry-go-round and are now thinking, maybe I don't want to go back on it. And I think the number of people wanting to start businesses and charities, arguably, is off the scale now because people have had time to think and reflect.
And that's why it's so important to find your passion, but your passion may well not be what you thought it was. And so I think you've just got to be really open to everything that comes along and give it a go, because it might lead to your passion. It might not, but it might.
Who would have thought the letter writing would have become our passion? Wouldn't have thought that, would we?
No, not when we were doing vodka shops.
No, exactly. Trying to find my way to.
Alison, your reputation is going down every 5 minutes. We're going boozing in the city. We're high pro. You know, it's like, oh yeah,
we did do a bit of work. We did do long hours.
Yeah, but it's great to see. I think, dare I say it, it's almost like people with a strong corporate background and a background in the city. If it's almost like, well, if people, and I mean this in the nicest possible way, if people like you, so steeped in all that, with all the trappings that are created from it, can make a break from that and do something that makes a massive difference, and do something that you can have fun with, you can enjoy, you can be creative with. Anybody can, can't they?
Yeah. Hope for anyone.
Yeah, there is. Yeah, absolutely.
We can.
Yeah. I'm waiting for Alison's book, Behind the Scenes in the City. I think that's going to be a bestseller, to be honest. Yeah, but it's great. And, you know, I broke away from my corporate life now just under 20 years ago. And it was and I've told this story to some people when I do speeches at conferences or training courses. And, you know, it is that kind of, and it's that bravery, I suppose, to a point as well of, you know, what will people think, and the fear, I guess, more than anything else.
Yeah.
Do you look at life totally differently now, Brian? Having had that cancer scare, having had that cancer situation, has it changed your outlook on life at all? They sometimes say it does. I don't know.
I would say yes and no. You know, I still have my bad mood days occasionally and think, you know, hey, you know, what the hell's going on here? But generally, I just think to myself, life's an adventure, and we should take every opportunity we can. I've never been on holiday so much in the last 10 years than I have in my whole life. You know, it gave me a zest for travel and to do that. And I just think it means that I think what it's also done is that it made me choose my friends more carefully.
That's an interesting one. Do you know what? We'll end up with a large number of quotes from all these shows, and I think that could well be in that list.
Because you have acquaintances, and they can be acquaintances, but you need some strong people around you who know you've got your back, and you don't need very many of them. In fact, you know, less than a handful is probably the best. But that is one thing that maybe is that you cherish those people in your life.
Wonderful. I've got a question here actually from somebody somebody called Solomon. I'm assuming I think that is a male name. And Solomon says, what are your plans for the charity? Where you going to go with the charity?
So we, with the charity, we provide several services at the moment. So we have donate a letter, we have lots of online workshops, letter writing workshops. We have something called the Happy Box, where anybody with a cancer diagnosis can dip in and request a letter at any time to be sent to their home. And the latest thing that we're looking into is setting up a pen pal service. Because at the moment the letters are anonymous and people don't write back. But we have had quite a lot of requests from people saying, I'd like to be able to have more of a connection. And we think that a pen pal offering it kind of really does, we really do start to tackle the social isolation element of cancer then. So that's the next thing that we're on with. And online workshops have been a bit of a revelation to us over the last year, because everybody from all over the place, all over the world can join them. So we've got one tomorrow night with teaming up with another cancer charity called Yes to Life. And we can then just help people know what to write, know what to say, give them ideas and inspiration for their letters, deal with that difficult first line. And so I think we're going to do a lot more of those, because we've done workshops in the past, but they'd always been physical in person. So they could only ever be in the local area to wherever the group was. Whereas the online has given us just a much greater. So tomorrow, I think there'll be nearly 80 people on the workshop.
Wow. Yeah. Well, that's it. Because it's, you know, as we were saying before we came on air, it's the whole pandemic things has forced people, older people, and I'm using that in lightly, older people to get to grips with the technologies, maybe sons, daughters, whatever, have helped mum, dad, grandma, whatever, to kind of get to grips with it, because the motivation to use it and understand it has never been greater. So it's been almost impossible to ignore it, which was what people would tend to do, and understandably so. So, and I guess, is it fair to say then as well, with the online element, that you're able to reach out further than the shores of the UK? Yeah,
well, we've always had quite a global audience for people writing for us for Donate a Letter. So we probably get letters from about 25, 30 countries, all written in English, thank goodness. But it does mean that, yes, so onto our workshops, we now have people coming from, you know, east and west, depending on their time zones. So actually, I had an email this morning from somebody who signed up for tomorrow night saying that they're in the Philippines. So they'll be keeping themselves awake with coffee until they join us at what will be like 1 o'clock their time or something.
That's dedicated, isn't it?
Folks, you'll know you've arrived when you're doing it in Arabic. That's my kind of feeling on it. So when we're done, Brian, you need to get into those Arabic writing books.
All right.
That's your homework for the next
Thank
6
you.
months. Right. Okay. Well, wow, what a wonderful interview. Thanks ever so much for joining me today. Gosh, that's not inspirational to people. I really don't know what is. I certainly have got an awful lot from that on a number of different levels. And, that's one of the reasons we want to do these passions interviews, is to give people insight. We call it the 4 I's basically, but insight, inspiration, information, and ideas. And just one person watches this and thinks, well, if Alison can leave the city, I can leave the city. But of course, you'll never know. And I think this is going back to the point I was making that Brian supported me on, is you really probably don't know, in truth, some of the differences that you're making, because it doesn't come back to you. It just happens in its own sweet way. Just in the same way that we don't know who watches these videos that then go and do something and it completely changes their lives. So I just think it's amazing, and thanks ever so much for joining me today, and obviously being so candid about your journeys. And what's the website address then, Alison? I'll ask you for people to find out more about the charity.
We are from me2youletters.co.uk. And we're on all social media as well.
Okay. And if you're watching this on catch up, if you look below, I'll put that link into the comments below as well. So if you want to support this charity and go on a triathlon with Alison and Brian. No, maybe not. Sorry, I must have misheard that. I thought you said everybody had to do a triathlon that involved.
No, just donate some stamps. Just donate stamps.
Just donate some stamps and write a flipping letter. I mean, it's not a lot to ask, is it?
Easier.
Not a lot to ask. Right. Thank you ever so much for joining me today, Alison and Brian. An absolute joy. And thank you. And hopefully, maybe I say to all my guests, hopefully, maybe I'll meet you in real terms, in the real world at some point, and maybe have a beer or a coffee or both. Who knows?
Yeah.
Thanks very much indeed for joining me, folks.
Thank you.
Thanks, Phil.
Thank you.
Take care.
Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.